It is amazing, both Mark and Josh, like I guess the older I get, these just the tentacles within startup land, within B2B land, within B2B sales and marketing land. The people you meet, the people you sometimes stay in touch with, and then the people that sometimes you started your career with, right? Like as you get on, you go up in your career, and then all of a sudden the people that you were interns with or decision makers at the companies you're trying to sell to. It's a tiny little world.
It is.
Oh man! All right, so it is top of the hour now. Let's get going. So welcome everybody to Thanksgiving week. I figured this was a good time to sort of get folks together. Let's, if you need a little break from work, if you're already ready for Thanksgiving dinner and you just want to sort of veg out for a couple minutes, do it with us. We're going to talk a little about conversational sales, the evolution of sales. And quite frankly, guys, the evolution of sales well before the pandemic. I think, when we see exponential change in the way sales happens, or the way anything happens, I think sometimes we see that sort of slowly and then suddenly. A lot of the trends we're seeing this year have been happening for a while. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But we are here together because the three of our companies, Drift, Sales Benchmarking Index, SBI, Heinz Marketing, we are doing some research around conversational sales. And if you're watching this and if you're interested in this conversation, we want your feedback in this survey as well. So I will throw a link to that into the comments here in a section. But I want to introduce our guest today. We've got Mark Killens from Drift, Josh Hortzman from SBI. Josh, why don't we start with you? Just introduce yourself, your role, and maybe just really briefly sort of how you're seeing conversational sales in particular evolve this year, especially given the pandemic.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, thanks, Matt, and great to be on. Thanks, everyone, and to do this with Mark. So Josh Hortzman, I'm a partner over at SBI, and we're for those who don't know SBI, we're a strategic consulting firm focused on revenue growth. And a lot of what we do is help organizations accelerate revenue through things such as sales strategy, marketing strategy, digital transformations. And, what we're seeing in the marketplace right now is the acceleration of digital conversational marketing is a piece of that, technology, process, people, and the whole virtual selling accelerated obviously back in the March timeframe. And so what we're doing now is just really thinking about how do you take what's happened, because the normal is not going to go back to normal, right? Let's just figure out that it is where we are. And we're really starting to see the digital piece of this accelerate more than ever. And people that were in the field now working from homes, those legacy sellers have got to change. Technology has to change, companies has to change. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And there's the people that are surviving right now, there's the people that are observing right now, and they're the people that are accelerating right now. So, we can talk about those buckets individually, but that's a lot of what we're seeing is that acceleration going through the digital piece.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about those buckets because I think that's an important part of knowing not only how you are adjusting to the current sales environment, but the sales environment that comes out of the pandemic is going to look very different than what it did before, and it's going to reflect an acceleration of the trends that we've seen. Mark, thanks for joining us. So first of all, Mark and the Drift team have been great partners of Heinz Marketing. We've done some really interesting content and research together, and in addition to the conversational marketing side of the coin, we're working on sort of figuring out, okay, how does that now map to conversational sales? And we've seen a lot of that already, Mark, this year. Just the evolution and the acceleration of buyers who want to just engage in a more casual conversational level with their sellers.
Yeah. Again, thanks, Matt. Thank you, Josh. It's awesome to be doing this research with the Sales Benchmark Index and Heinz Marketing again. Number one, that's top of mind for myself and a lot of folks at Drift is habits. How have our habits as sellers, marketers, account managers, customer success managers changed when it comes to like engaging and interacting with our customers and our buyers? So I think, Josh, to your point on the digital transformation piece, that's probably more on like the technology side. And when you think about habits, it's tech-driven maybe, it's process-driven, but it's also people-driven. The whole people, process, technology kind of, pyramid or tripod you can put things under or in. I just think from a people standpoint, we as people have fundamentally changed in so many ways. And our habits are changing. And I still think they're getting ingrained in different ways. Some of them I do think will come back, just albeit differently. So when we look at this research, we're trying to unpack on the conversational selling side, how do you go about building relationships with your buyers and customers today in a much more digital first or maybe digital only world. So yeah, I'd love to pick your brain on this, Josh and Matt, to see what you think. Like, Matt, your team is selling every day. Josh, your team is talking to some of the biggest companies in the world. Like, what are they seeing from a habit standpoint, even before we talk about the technology? How are people changed in the way they actually are building a relationship, both from the buyer standpoint and seller standpoint? Like, what do you see, Josh?
Yeah, I think we've moved from, the initial pandemic caused everyone to go home, right? So you kind of went through those initial, taking care of your family, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The things that people just had to get to a work from home environment, the technology, the people, how do you manage your day? You have homeschooling, you have, a lot of things. And we've now we're coming into some areas of the country where that spike is happening again. So there's some of that, I guess, re-happening. But I think a lot of what folks are now working through on the people side is, I was a seller in the field. I had that ability to go out and see my customers, see my prospects. That has moved and that has changed. So the last couple of months have been, how do I take my calendar of when I had my social interactions with those clients and prospects, and how can I duplicate them? Meaning, can I still do a virtual happy hour? Can I still do a cooking class or a dinner? Or how am I taking the things I did pre-pandemic and being able to do them today and building those relationships on digital tools, right? And so you've seen that from buyers are now embracing the ability to sell remotely. We've seen it. Everyone's talking about it. I think people, in some instances, prefer it. On the seller side, there's also, I think, a little bit of burnout happening where you have no shut off now, right? People are waking up, they're getting on their Zoom calls or, whatever technology it is, they're going until 7, 8 o'clock at night. They've got family, they've got, all the pets now. And there is no disconnect between I was in an airplane, I was on a train, I was on a commute, and now it's like I'm always on. So I think the sellers, number one, had to really learn how to sell virtually, but more importantly, now they have to manage their time and how to manage their some of their lifestyle, right? And I think that's some of the things we're starting to see is that burnout, where the A players are being asked to do a lot more than they were before. The C players may be in the market, and the B players are kind of like, okay, how do I navigate this new normal of trying to sell? So I would just say those are a couple of things, Marks, that we're seeing in the marketplace right now with on the people side.
I love that. Yeah, day in the life, Matt, almost, right? It's kind of like the day in the life, Josh and Matt, has changed.
Well, and it's being driven by the buyers, right? I think, too often we get this into this insular world of saying, well, do we want to be more efficient in how we sell? And do we want to think about how sales and marketing work together in terms of how they sell? Like, that's all super important. But how do you change based on the way the buyer is changing? I think a couple things are happening. First, as you referenced, Josh, your buyers are increasingly digital natives. They're used to being able to do things online. And two, I think, they're seeing that remote buying is not only more efficient for the seller, it's preferential to the buyer as well. They don't need someone to call on them. They don't want someone to do the dog and pony. They increasingly see, like, I literally had an old school, manufacturing guy tell me the other day, he wakes up in the morning and he pours himself a bowl of excellence. Like, there's some of that old school selling that just it's seen as cheesy now and inauthentic to today's buyers. And this is not something that has happened just because of the pandemic. We've seen that move to digital buying, digital selling happen before the pandemic. I don't know that we're going to go back to a scenario that we had before. I guess, question for you, Mark, like, how, for the time you spent at HubSpot, the time you spent at Drift, how has the conversational element of this really sort of accelerated? Like, where have you seeing, sort of the idea of chatbots evolve, not just for marketing, but as a direct selling tool as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me unpack it though first from like a human standpoint. I think one thing that has changed the most, because you made the comment, Josh, about like, I'm in the airplane, I'm in the hotel, I'm going to my job from a commute standpoint. It's our sensory components. Like all the senses we have, I think, we have 5, maybe 6 senses maybe, but we have these senses that have been disrupted. So our human senses have been disrupted, and now they're replaced with the things you mentioned, Josh. And when it comes from like a conversational standpoint, I really think from a sales standpoint, people think, oh, we're going to use messaging or chat or email to book that first meeting, right? To get in the door, and it's more than likely coming from an inbound motion. It's like, oh, they're going to reach out to us or whatever, right? conversational sales, I think, is most effective, and we'll see this in the research, I think, and actually something that's going to launch next week. We're launching a whole new book on Monday, the 30th, but it's from an outbound standpoint. How do we do more effective outbound outreach that's authentic, that's personal, that then the seller can also use as a way to gauge interest, using the power of notifications. And a smart seller is going to understand all those signals they get back from her outbound outreach or any type of inbound inquiry, and use the most effective channel to then engage in real time or engage maybe in a day or two. Mm-hmm. So I love, Josh, to know your thoughts on the outbound side of selling and how it is becoming more conversationally driven through the digital side of things. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, the number one standard operating procedure that most folks should have, whether they're in marketing or sales, is have you updated your buyer journey and your personas, right? If you're not using those two tools, you're behind the 8 ball, because you're assuming that what you did last January and February is how the buyer and the personas buy today. And that's not the case. We've just talked about that. We've seen it. So you have to go back and revisit those. And that should be done with interviews and having conversations with folks that are actually in those buying decision teams that you work with. I think the other thing that we're seeing is on the outbound side is, how do you take the tools that are happening and how are you taking all those things that you're doing and making it personal? You mentioned this, Mark, personalization. Everyone says, oh yeah, we have a digital strategy. What is that? Oh, we have a LinkedIn page. We have a Facebook, we're Twitter, whatever we're doing. That's stage one of what we call the digital maturity model. It's how do you then move up that maturity model and say, okay, we have social media. Great. Check. We're using the social medias internally. Okay. That's maybe level 2. Level 3 is how are you using those externally? How are you engaging with prospects and customers? That's maybe getting up to level 3 and level 4. But 5 is, how are you taking those tools and personalizing? So when I talk to Mark or Matt, I am very specific on what is important to them. What do I understand about their social networks? What do I understand on how they're doing it? And that is where I think people need to get to from the digital side on outbound, because right now you can't just pick up the phone, call 7 times. Yeah, you might get somebody. Those days of just email blasts and calling and those are old school. And people that say they have digital strategies that are still doing that, I would say they're back on a level 1, and people have passed them, and they've got to catch up quickly or they're going to get left behind.
Guys, we got a question from our viewers here on the LinkedIn live stream. Marshall Kirkpatrick. Marshall, good to see you. Hope you and your family are well down in Portland. So we talked about conversational marketing. We talked about for a while. We're sort of exploring in this survey the role of conversational sales. Marshall, and this is a question for either of you, what is the role of customer care and how has that changed? Is that also going more digital? Is that also, becoming more conversational? Is it just a customer facing overall, or does customer care play by slightly different rules?
Yeah, I'll start, I guess, from a customer care, and I guess, Marshall, I'll also kind of lump in their customer success, right? Because there's different types of customer, right? It's like inbound or inside. There's a lot of different things that you could be customer. So if you're thinking about customer care as customer success, yeah, we've seen the big influx of, I think, first of all, everyone went back to their base, right? The install base was even more important to, number one, you had to maintain those and keep them because they were under cost constraints during the pandemic. So customer success teams, customer care, we called them tiger teams, figuring out who had the best relationships on those clients when they first were going through this whole, COVID-19. That there's absolutely I would say a digital component to this where, think about your own personal life. Do you want to chat with somebody at your bank, or do you want to sit there and go through a phone tree when you call? Or what are the digital tools that your customers want? And as you're thinking about customer care, customer success, you have to either retain some big customers, you have to develop those customers, and there's tools that you should be looking at that should facilitate that. And the customer experience on top of mind of CEOs today coming out of this is one of the number 2 or 3 projects we're seeing around the customer experience, because the success and care teams are very important in that, and they should be the feedback loop to provide that to upper management on how they can accelerate those types of transformations if that's something you're doing. So I don't know, Mark, your thoughts?
I think it's spot on. I'm going to add the point you made about omni-channel. You basically got to give people options. You can't just expect them to go through your one rigid process. We talk a lot about, excuse me, the business has lost all control. But the pandemic now has really driven that home. Over the last 20, 30 years, from the invention of the internet to the creation of the cloud, The businesses have lost control because so much of that power has shifted to the consumer because of technology, right? And I think this last thing that happened in 2020 has made that shift completely apparent. So if you don't give people an omni-channel approach to helping your customers succeed and your buyers buy from you, they'll either go to one of your competitors, right? Or they'll cancel and then look at one of your competitors, or they will or they'll talk so badly about you online, which is going to be huge damage to your brand and chance of getting new business. And there's other scenarios too, but like those are the things that stand out top of mind for me because they have a voice. Every person has his voice, and the voice is conversational. It can be in a one-to-one way, or it could be in a one-to-many way, broadcast way. But we as people who are helping our customers succeed, hopefully, need to your point, Josh, look at the key interactions, the key moments in the buyer's journey, in the life cycle journey, and make sure we have uncovered or turned over every stone that's part of that interaction sequence, and making sure nothing goes overlooked. Like I would be doing a massive audit, and we've been doing this at Drift, but we've been recommending to customers of ours, do an audit of all these key engagement points and see how people are enjoying them and what are they driving from a business standpoint. Like, is it revenue generating? Is it revenue retention? Is it more brand building and advocacy? Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I'll say, that's a great point, Mark, because we same thing is, if you're not taking the time to either on a whiteboard, a visual tool, whatever that is, and everyone's like, well, where's the sales process fit? Where does the marketing funnel fit? Where does my onboarding fit? And if you're not mapping out that entire customer life cycle, so this touches the entire company, right? From the time they're not even in the market, they hit your website, they see something that's collateral, all the way through the marketing funnel and through the sales process, all the way through, I get handed over to the team that's going to do either the implementation or onboarding of a customer, to the time there's a renewal, there's customer success, there's advocacy, there's referrals. If you're not mapping that out, and to your point, you call them like, what are the key points? We call them points of leverage, right? What are the key points of leverage? Where are the 5 or 6 you have got to nail with that client or prospect coming through that process? And if you don't nail them, you are going to lose that customer, and they're going to churn, and they're going to churn to go to the competitor. They're going to churn and spend less. They're going to speak negatively out on social media. And so this, I think, is a big bet that people are making as they go into 2021 on. And this is, I spoke about earlier, is the observers, the survivalists, and the accelerators. The people that are accelerating are doing that. The people that are surviving are just sitting back and saying, I had to cut costs. I don't even have enough of a team right now. And that happened, right? And it's the reality. But as you're moving through this and hopefully being agile and changing the way you're going to market in this commercial engine, those are the types of things you should be mapping out.
Last question I want to ask you guys, and we'll let you guys go and let everyone else go as well, is so Mark, you had pointed out right before we started recording a really interesting article by Dave Boyce, who's the Chief Strategy Officer over at Zant, talking about sort of the future of sales. And he lists in his article, definitely recommend it. I'll put it in the comments here in a second, but he lists a bunch of things that he considers sort of table stakes for how sellers or how buyers are engaging today. And we've covered a lot of them here already. One we haven't really covered is the speed of information, the speed of gathering information, and the speed of expecting information back. Talk a little bit about, Mark, I'll start with you, maybe finish off with Josh, like what you're seeing in terms of sort of the speed of the micro and the macro speed of selling today with these digital natives.
It's a great question. McKinsey has published a ton of free research since COVID happened. So McKinsey, tremendous consulting firm, as many of us know, they found that B2B decision makers, and so this might not be a surprise, but I got to say it, they found B2B decision makers value 3 things the most: transparency, being helpful, and being fast. So like, what does that mean? Like, well, like transparency, it's like trust, like, you become a trusted, helpful expert in the thing you sell, right? Or with the thing you sell, that solution, hopefully it's more than just like a tool. It's like a solution you're selling to someone. And if you're selling a tool or a solution, the thing you have to pay attention to is the customer experience, which I would argue speed is a big piece of that customer experience. speed to an answer, speed to a person, speed to issue resolution. If it's more on the customer support side, that is really imperative these days. So for us, it's about how can you use artificial intelligence to augment some of this. We're gonna actually be doing another research report in Q1 too, Josh and Matt, the state of like marketing AI, and that's going to be fascinating because we're looking at 47 to 48 different use cases of how marketers are using AI. And I would say 30% of those are blended with sales. Like it's going to have a sales angle, of course, as well, because it's pipeline generation, which is revenue. But when you think about speed, how can you as a marketer focus on the things, to your point, Josh, that you feel are going to have the biggest impact on revenue, but the customer experience? So what are those key moments that you described? And could you use artificial intelligence in that way? The other thing I think you need to do on the sales side, which is part of something we actually just released last week, one of our new books called The SLA is Now, talking about speed. The SLA is not 5 minutes, 12 hours, 24 hours. It's now. Notifications. As a seller, you need to leverage real-time notifications. So one of the last things I'll say, and Josh, I'd love to get your take on this, is the thing, if I was a sales team going into 2021, that the thing that I'd be focused on would be training and enablement. Like, how can I use something like real-time notifications in my sales organization to then respond? Those notifications could be anything from, I see a buyer engaging on my website with this content and they engage with a chatbot. They didn't live chat. They didn't email me. They just did these 3 things within 10 minutes. What should I do with that information, depending on where that buyer is in the process? Or the buyer is a late-stage opportunity, and they open up an email of mine, they watch one of my videos, and they go to my legal page to look at my TOS. Like, what should I do in that situation? You should be doing something. You should be at least knowing that they are doing that, have that notification, those sets of notifications, and you should be acting in a faster way, I think, Matt. So yeah, Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't disagree. What comes to mind for me is really the KPIs and metrics. So what does fast success look like? What does success look like in general? And I think a lot of times people focus on what I call the lagging indicators. So they're looking at things that are happening downstream, bookings, revenue, lead generation, conversions. And so I would say, as you're thinking about how fast you're going, what are the behavior and leading indicators? So what are the things that are doing behavior? What are sellers doing? What are buyers doing that are behavior changes? What are things that are leading indicators? And then ultimately the lagging. So I think as you're thinking about this whole entire, journey people are on, it's really bucket them into those 3 different things, and then have the KPI metrics you're reporting out, the ones that are red and yellow. Don't focus on the green. And that'll help you accelerate and go fast, because everyone loves to talk about what they're doing great, but they don't talk about where they're stuck and having problems. So focus on the behavior leading ones. It's like driving a car, looking at the rearview mirror. You can't always focus on the lagging indicators because they happened, right? They're going to come downstream. So that would be the only thing I would add. But those are definitely areas where people need to be agile and fast. Those are the ones that accelerate through this pandemic.
Well, and if there's one way to sort of summarize this conversation, gentlemen, I think it's sort of like look at your buyer and act accordingly. Like, what are they looking at? What behavior are they expecting? What behavior are they exhibiting? What information are they looking for in what format? Doesn't matter how you want to sell. It matters how the buyer wants to buy and how the buyer wants to engage. I think that gives all of us some really great clues and evidence on how to engage. Well, Mark and Josh, thank you so much for this conversation. I put a link to the Future of Sales article in there, but a couple of times I also put in a link to the survey we're doing. If you are in a sales role and you would like to learn what some of your peers are doing with conversational sales, please take the survey. Those that take the survey and give us a little bit of feedback will be some of the first to see the results from this. And I think we'll have some really good instructional, directional advice, not just sort of trend data, but really practical advice for how sellers can take advantage of conversational sales moving forward. Gentlemen, thanks for doing this. Have a good rest of your short week before the holiday, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.